The sun hung low over the jagged horizon of the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the high desert in strokes of burnt orange and deep shadow. Dust devils swirled lazily across the arid plain, kicking up fine red earth that clung to everything: skin, hides, the very air one breathed. This was the land of the Ndi, the Apache people, a place where survival demanded more than strength. It required a harmony with the earth itself, an unspoken pact with the wind and stone. In the summer of 1870s, as white settlers pressed ever closer from the east, the Apaches moved like ghosts through these canyons and mesas, their lives a delicate balance of vigilance and endurance. Che, a wiry young man of 19 summers, crouched at the edge of a dry wash, his dark eyes scanning the cracked ground. His name meant rock, a fitting moniker for one born in the shadow of these ancient peaks. He wore a simple breechcloth of woven yucca fiber, his chest bare and marked with faint scars from boyhood hunts, reminders of scrapes against thorny mesquite and falls from rocky outcrops. A headband of leather held back his long black hair, and at his side hung a small pouch of tools, a sharpened bone awl, strips of sinew, and a few precious pebbles for weighting his sling. Tseye was no warrior yet, but he aspired to be a scout, one of those elite trackers whose eyes could read the land's secrets like an open book. Beside him knelt his uncle Chin, a seasoned scout in his 40s, whose face was etched with lines like the arroyos below. Chin's reputation stretched across the bands. He had once followed a raiding party's trail through 3 days of monsoon rains, unearthing their camp before they could strike. "Look there," Chin murmured, his voice low and gravelly, pointing to a faint disturbance in the soil. "Not the wind. See how the pebbles are turned, edges up. A horse's hoof, pressing deep, then lifting light. The rider was in haste but careful." Tseye leaned closer, his breath steady despite the heat radiating from the earth. The air shimmered, carrying the sharp scent of creosote bushes and the distant tang of pinon resin from the higher slopes. He traced the mark with a calloused finger, feeling the subtle shift in the dirt's texture. 2 days old, maybe 3, he said, echoing the lessons drilled into him since childhood. The sun has baked it flat, but the ants, they avoid this spot. No burrow here before. Chin nodded, a rare flicker of approval in his stern gaze. Good. Ants remember the weight. Now, the direction. He rose smoothly, his moccasins of soft deer hide whispering against the ground, and gestured toward the eastern ridge. The mountains loomed there, their basalt cliffs scarred by flash floods and etched with hidden caves, perfect for ambushes or retreats. The band they belonged to, a small group of Warm Springs Apaches, had been migrating southward for weeks, driven by rumors of UAS, army patrols scouting the borders. Water was scarce, the last reliable spring lay miles behind, and the nights brought a chill that seeped into bones like winter's first bite. As they crested the ridge, the vast expanse unfolded below, a sea of sagebrush and scattered junipers, broken by deep gullies where seasonal rivers carved their fleeting paths. Che's stomach tightened at the sight. His family, mother, 2 sisters, and a younger brother, trailed with the main group, herding a few ponies laden with dried venison, acorns, and baskets of mescal hearts. They moved at dawn and dusk to avoid the midday blaze, when the temperature could sear flesh from careless wanderers. But today, Chin had pulled Tseye aside for this lesson, away from the women and elders who managed the camp's rhythm. "Tracks like this don't vanish," Chin continued, his tone measured as if reciting a sacred rhythm. "The white man's horses are heavy, shod with iron that bites the earth. But even when the print fades, the land speaks. Bent grass recovers slow in the heat. A stone kicked aside leaves its shadow longer under the sun. And the rider, feel his fear in the stride." They descended into a narrow canyon, walls rising sheer on either side, cool shade offering brief respite. Tseye's moccasins gripped the loose gravel, each step deliberate to avoid dislodging rocks that might echo and betray their position. He had learned early that silence was the Apache's greatest weapon. Raiders from other tribes or the bluecoats could be anywhere, their rifles turning the open land into a killing field. As a boy, Tseye had watched his father vanish on a scouting run, never to return. Ambushed by Mexican bounty hunters, the story went. That loss fueled his drive, turning curiosity into obsession. Halfway down, Chin halted, kneeling again. Here the trail was colder still, the ground a mosaic of sun-bleached sand and thorny debris. No clear prints marred the surface, but Chin's fingers sifted through the dust like a diviner. 4 days now, he said. The rider went cold here, thinking himself safe. But see the yucca stalk? Snapped clean, not by wind, by a branch whipping back from a hasty turn. And the dust. Finer particles settle uneven. He dismounted, perhaps to rest or listen. Chue imitated the motion, his heart quickening. The canyon amplified every sound. The distant call of a canyon wren, the rustle of a lizard skittering into cover. He imagined the rider, a lone cavalry scout maybe, or a fleeing settler, pausing in this very spot, sweat stinging his eyes, unaware of the eyes that could pierce the veil of time. "How do you know it's one man?" Tsehe asked, wiping grit from his brow. Chin's laugh was soft, almost lost in the wind. "One horse leaves one echo. Listen to the land, nephew. It doesn't lie." He stood, scanning the far wall where a thin trickle of moisture stained the rock. A seep spring vital in this desolation. We follow to the next band of elders. They say a rider passed through, carrying messages for the soldiers at Fort Bowie. If we find him, we learn their plans. If not, we teach the young ones why trails never truly go cold. As they pressed on, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced like wary spirits across the canyon floor. Tseya felt the weight of the task settling on him, not as burden, but as purpose. The desert tested them daily, scorching days that drained the body, nights where frost rimed the bedrolls, and the endless hunt for game in lands stripped by drought. Yet in these trials, the Apache thrived, their knowledge passed like a flame from hand to hand. By dusk, they reached a sheltered alcove where the band had paused. Smoke from a small fire curled upward, screened by overhanging ledges to evade distant eyes. Che'e's mother, Nail, approached with a gourd of cool water from the seep, her face lined with the quiet resolve of one who had buried too many. "The trail?" she asked simply, handing it to Chi'in first. "Leading east," he replied, drinking deeply. "We track it tomorrow. Tseya sees well." She turned to her son, her dark eyes searching. "See, but do not rush. The land rewards the patient." Around the fire the group gathered, elders sharing stories of past hunts, children practicing with slings, the air filled with the sizzle of roasting agave and the low murmur of Chiricahua dialect. Che'e sat among them, the day's lesson burning in his mind. Little did he know, this faint trail would soon pull them into a web of pursuit, testing the very skills that defined their survival. But for now, under the emerging stars, the desert whispered its secrets, and Tse'e listened. The first light of dawn crept over the canyon rims, a pale gold that chased away the night's chill without mercy. Tse'e stirred from his bedroll, the thin blanket of woven rabbit fur damp with dew. The air carried the crisp bite of morning, mingled with the earthy scent of cooling stones and the faint smoke from last night's fire, now reduced to grey ash. Around him, the band moved with quiet efficiency, women grinding mescal roots into flour with stone manos, men checking the ponies' tethers, their hides slick from the overnight moisture. No one spoke loudly. Words were saved for necessity in this land where echoes could summon danger. Chin was already up, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape, a familiar cadence. He glanced at Tse'e, nodding toward the eastern trail. "We leave now, before the sun wakes the snakes." Tse'e rose, splashing water from the seep onto his face, the cool trickle a brief luxury. His muscles ached from yesterday's trek, but the pull of the lesson overrode fatigue. He tied his pouch securely, slinging a small water skin over his shoulder, filled sparingly, as every drop counted in the migration southward. They slipped away from camp without fanfare, Nail watching from afar with a mix of pride and worry etched in her posture. The canyon opened into a broader valley, where the ground shifted from loose sand to packed earth dotted with cholla cactus, their spines glinting like warnings. The trail here was fainter still, a ghost of impressions that only the trained eye could discern. Chin moved ahead, his steps light as a deer's, pausing every few paces to crouch and examine the terrain. "Yesterday was the easy part," Chin said, his voice barely above the whisper of wind through the junipers. Hoofprints shout to the sky, but when the trail goes cold, you read the silence. He pointed to a cluster of low shrubs, their branches bent at odd angles. "See? Not broken by deer. They graze even. This is from rains, dragged low as the rider led his horse through tight passes. The leaves face east, curled from the pull." Tseye knelt beside him, inhaling the sharp, resinous aroma of the creosote that permeated the air. The valley floor baked even in the early hours, heat rising in waves that distorted the horizon. He traced the bent stems, feeling the subtle give in the wood, fresh enough to suggest the passage within the last day, but weathered by the relentless sun. He avoided the open plain, Tseye observed, piecing it together. "Staying in cover like us." Chin grunted approval. "Smart man or desperate, whites ride bold until the land teaches them fear." They pressed on, the valley giving way to a series of low ridges, each climb pulling sweat from Tseye's skin to mix with the red dust. His moccasins, soft-soled for silence, gripped the scree without slipping, a skill honed from years of chasing jackrabbits across similar slopes. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky a fierce blue, and the temperature soared, making every breath feel labored. Tseye's throat tightened with thirst, but he rationed his water, knowing the seep back at camp might dry by midday. As they crested the third ridge, the land transformed into a labyrinth of arroyos, deep cuts in the earth from ancient floods, their walls layered in stratified reds and ochres. Here the trail vanished entirely into the soft bottom, scoured by wind and occasional rains. Chin halted at the edge, his eyes narrowing against the glare. This is where most lose it. The wash erases all. But look beyond the obvious. He descended carefully, Chewe following, their feet sinking into the powdery silt that sucked at each step like a living thing. At the base, no prints marked the surface, but Chin sifted the sand with his fingers, unearthing a single brittle thorn from a nearby catclaw bush. Snagged on the stirrup, fell here not carried by wind, too clean, no dust coating. Tseye scanned the opposite bank, spotting a subtle depression in the mud, where moisture lingered in cracks. And there, the horse drank. The edges crumbled, not smooth like rain would leave. They forded the shallow remnant of water, the trickle barely wetting their ankles, tasting of minerals and dust. Tseye felt a surge of exhilaration. The land was revealing itself, layer by layer, under Chin's guidance. But as they climbed the far side, a low rumble echoed from the north, a distant thunderhead building over the mountains, promising a rare storm that could flood these washes in minutes. Chin's face tightened. "We push fast. Rain will bury this deeper." The urgency quickened their pace, hearts pounding in rhythm with the rising wind. Tseye's mind raced ahead, envisioning the rider. A soldier, perhaps with dispatches outlining patrol routes, or a messenger stirring tensions between bands. The Apaches had evaded the army for years, but whispers of Geronimo's raids to the south meant alliances were fracturing, and knowledge was power, or peril. Midday found them in a narrower defile, where boulders the size of ponies cluttered the path. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of impending rain, and fat drops began to patter, turning the dust to mud underfoot. Chin cursed softly in their tongue, the word sharp as flint. "Storm comes early. We shelter or lose the day." They ducked under an overhang, a natural ledge carved by centuries of erosion, its underside cool and shadowed. Tseye pressed against the rock, feeling the vibration of thunder in his chest, while rain sheeted down, transforming the arroyo into a churning torrent. In the dim light, Chin pulled a strip of pemmican from his pouch, dried meat pounded with fat and berries, and broke it in half. They chewed slowly, the nourishment steadying them as the storm raged. "Tracks drown in water," Chin said between bites, "but not all signs. When the flood passes, mud hardens with the weight's memory. Hooves leave cracks that spider out wider on the forelegs from the rider's pull." Tseye nodded, wiping rain from his eyes. The roar outside drowned all else, a reminder of the desert's dual face, parched killer by day, vengeful deluge by storm. He thought of his family miles back, securing the camp against flash floods. Nahil would lead them to higher ground, her commands calm and unyielding, as she had when Tse''s father died. That memory stung, fueling his resolve. What if the rider crossed before the rain? How far can we go blind? Chin's eyes met his, steady as the ancient rocks. Farther than you think. We read the banks, overturned stones, bent reeds, and the horse, its sweats, leaves salt crystals in the wind's path. Even days cold, the land holds echoes. As the rain eased to a drizzle, they emerged, the world transformed. The arroyo ran brown and frothy, but on the far bank, Chin found it, a faint outline in the fresh mud, the hoof's curve preserved like a fossil. They followed it upward, the trail re-emerging stronger, leading toward a distant mesa, where pinon pines clung to the flanks. Tse''s legs burned, but his senses sharpened, attuned to every whisper, the drip of water from leaves, the snap of a twig under careless boot. By late afternoon, as the sun broke through in shafts of steam, they spotted it, a discarded rag snagged on a mesquite thorn, faded blue cloth that screamed of army issue. Chin pocketed it without a word, his expression grim. He's close. Camped near, maybe last night. We circle wide, watch for fire smoke at dusk. Tse felt the thrill mix with caution, the weight of what this pursuit meant for the band. The rider carried more than messages. He carried the shadow of invasion, pressing the Apaches ever tighter against their unforgiving home. As they crested the mesa's base, the vast plain stretched below, dotted with distant herds of pronghorn, life persisting amid the harsh beauty. But in the gathering twilight, Tse sensed the pursuit tightening, drawing them into a dance as old as the mountains themselves. The twilight deepened into a velvet shroud over the mesa, the last rays of sun bleeding crimson across the jagged escarpment. Tse and Chin moved like shadows among the pinon pines, their branches twisted by decades of relentless wind, needles whispering secrets to the cooling air. The storm's aftermath lingered in the damp earth, releasing a pungent aroma of wet sage and mud that masked subtler scents. But Chin's nose twitched, attuned to the faint, acrid tang of horse sweat carried on the breeze. The discarded rag burned in Tse's mind, a scrap of blue wool frayed at the edges, its fibers stiff with dried perspiration. It was no accident. The rider had shed it like a skin, perhaps to lighten his load or discard a trace. They circled the mesa's flank in silence, descending a steep talus slope where loose rocks shifted underfoot, threatening to clatter into the void below. Tse's heart hammered, not just from the exertion but from the proximity of their quarry. The plain below undulated like a rumpled hide, dotted with clusters of prickly pear and the occasional yucca stalk standing sentinel. Distant thunder rumbled, a final grumble from the retreating storm, but the sky cleared to reveal a canopy of stars emerging one by one, guides for night travel, yet harbingers of the biting cold to come. "Smoke first," Chin murmured, halting behind a boulder cluster. His breath fogged slightly in the dropping temperature, and he scanned the horizon with eyes honed by years of evasion. No fire yet. He knows better than to light one bold. Tse nodded, crouching low, his fingers digging into the cool soil for stability. The day's rain had softened the ground just enough to reveal fresh signs. A scuff mark on a flat stone, where iron-shod hoof had glanced off, leaving a metallic glint in the fading light. Nearby, a single pine needle lay bent but unbroken, pressed flat by a boot heel. Human, not animal, the print too broad for moccasins. The pursuit felt intimate now, as if the land itself conspired to draw them closer. Chi recalled the elders' tales around the fire, not of ghosts, but of men who read the desert's memory. How a horse's droppings, hardened by sun, could indicate direction by the flies' paths, or how crushed insects underfoot spoke of passage at dawn when wings were stiff. Chin had taught him these layers early, during long afternoons grinding acorns into meal while dissecting old trails in the dirt. But theory paled against this hunt. Every sign pulled at Tse like a taut bowstring. They slipped down the slope, the mesa giving way to a shallow basin where seasonal grasses, greened by the rain, swayed in the wind. The air grew heavier, laced with the metallic scent of ozone and the underlying rot of flood-washed debris caught in gullies. Chin led them to a dry creek bed, its banks undercut and treacherous, and there the trail sharpened, a series of shallow depressions in the mud, spaced for a trotting horse burdened by one rider. Last night, Chin said, his voice a low rumble, he pushed hard after dark, risking the dark. Foolish unless hunted himself. Cheye examined the prints, noting the deeper forehoof sinks, the horse leaning into the rider's weight, perhaps urging it faster over uneven ground. The mud held the impressions well, cracks radiating from the edges like veins, but already the edges were drying, flaking under the evening breeze. He glanced up, spotting a low outcrop ahead, a natural windbreak where junipers huddled like conspirators. There, he whispered, pointing. Chin followed his gaze and grunted, a sound of shared understanding. As they approached, caution stretched their steps into a deliberate creep, moccasins testing each patch of ground for give. The cold seeped in now, nipping at exposed skin, and Tseye pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders, the woolen weave a comfort against the chill that could numb fingers and dull senses. The night symphony began, coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of small creatures seeking burrow, and the ever-present wind sighing through the pines like a mournful elder. Under the outcrop they found confirmation, a scatter of horse apples, partially scattered by wind but intact enough to show they were fresh, no more than 12 hours old. Chin prodded one with a stick, breaking the outer crust to reveal the moist interior. Oats in the fodder, he noted, frowning. Army stock, not wild greys. Cheye's stomach knotted. This rider wasn't a stray settler but a soldier, likely carrying maps or orders that could unravel the band's fragile peace. The Warm Springs people had danced on the edge of war for seasons, allying loosely with Chiricahuas to the south while dodging patrols from Fort Bowie. One message could summon troops, turning migration into flight. No camp remained. The rider had covered his traces well, kicking dirt over ashes if he'd risked a fire, but a faint scrape on the rock face caught Tseye's eye, a match strike, vertical and hurried, blackening the stone. Beside it, a discarded twist of tobacco, its wrapper paper curled from moisture. Chin pocketed it, his face a mask of calculation. He rested short, dawn start, heading for the pass. The pass lay miles east, a narrow defile through the Dragoon Mountains, a choke point for travelers and an ambush point for scouts. If the rider reached it, he could vanish into the broader valleys toward the San Simon River, where army outposts dotted the plain. Hunger gnawed at Cheye, but they pressed on, the moon rising to silver the landscape, casting long shadows that played tricks on the eye. The trail led them through a thicket of mesquite, thorns snagging at their blankets like insistent fingers. Cheye's arms burned from parting the branches, and sweat beaded on his brow despite the cold, mixing with dust to form a gritty mask. Chin moved ahead, pausing to listen, a skill beyond sight, feeling vibrations through the earth or the shift in wind patterns. An hour into the night, the signs grew erratic. The horse had stumbled on loose shale, leaving a spray of pebbles displaced downslope, their undersides pale from recent burial. Che knelt to realign one, confirming the direction by the tilt. "He's tiring," he said softly. "The horse fights the bit. See the foam flecks dried here?" Chin nodded, but his posture tensed. "Or he's wary. Whites spook easy in the dark." They crested a low rise, the pass's silhouette looming against the starry sky, a black slash in the mountains. Below, in a shallow depression, a flicker. Not fire, but the glint of metal under moonlight. Chin signaled halt, dropping to his belly in the grass. Cheye followed, crawling forward inch by inch, the sharp edges of bunchgrass slicing his palms. Peering over the edge, they saw it. The horse, tethered to a stunted oak, head low and flanks heaving. The rider huddled nearby, wrapped in a bedroll, his rifle propped within reach. No fire, no light. He ate cold rations, a shadow in the gloom. Cheye's pulse thundered in his ears, the proximity electric. The man was alone, his posture slumped with exhaustion, unaware of the eyes upon him. Chin's hand clamped Cheye's shoulder, steadying him. "We watch till dawn," he whispered. "No strike yet. Learn his moves." The night deepened, cold wrapping around them like a vice, but Tse felt alive, the land's pulse syncing with his own. This was the scout's art, not just following, but anticipating, weaving survival from the threads of silence. As the hours stretched, Tse's thoughts drifted to the band, miles back, Nile portioning the last of the pemmican among the children, her stories of resilience a bulwark against uncertainty. The rider stirred once, murmuring in his sleep, words lost to the wind. Tse wondered what drove him: duty, fear, the promise of pay in a land that offered only hardship. Dawn would bring decisions, shadow him further, or turn back with knowledge to warn the elders. For now, they waited, ghosts in the desert's embrace, the trail no longer cold but burning hot with possibility. Dawn's first blush crept over the eastern ridges, a hesitant pink that bled into the indigo sky, chasing the stars into retreat. Tse lay motionless on the dew-kissed grass, his body stiff from the night's vigil, muscles protesting the unyielding earth. The cold had deepened through the small hours, a knife-edge chill that numbed his toes and seeped into his joints, forcing him to shift only once, a mere roll to ease the cramp in his leg. Beside him, Chin breathed evenly, his form a darker outline against the paling horizon, eyes never fully closing. Scout slept light, if at all, in the open. Below, in the shallow depression, the rider stirred. He sat up abruptly, his bedroll tumbling away to reveal a rumpled uniform, the blue wool stained with travel's grime and the mud from yesterday's storm. Tse watched, breath held, as the man rubbed his face, stubble rasping under calloused palms, then reached for a canteen, gulping water with the desperation of one rationing life itself. The horse nickered softly, stamping a hoof against the dry soil, sending a puff of dust into the still air. No words passed between rider and beast, only the quiet clink of metal as he checked his saddlebags, extracting a strip of hardtack that he chewed methodically, eyes darting to the shadows of the pass. Chin's whisper cut the silence like a flint strike. "He moves soon. We shadow from the high ground." Tse nodded imperceptibly, his neck aching from the prone position. The air warmed fractionally with the light, carrying the sharp tang of wet earth and the faint, musky odor of the horse drifting uphill on a stray breeze. Tse's stomach growled, a hollow reminder that their pemmican had run out hours ago. But hunger was an old companion, tamed by will and the promise of mescal stew back at camp. They waited as the rider saddled up, his movements efficient but weary, cinching straps with gloved hands, muttering curses under his breath at a stubborn buckle. Tse strained to catch the words, but the wind swallowed them, leaving only the rhythm of labor. The man mounted with a grunt, the horse shifting under his weight, and they started east at a walk, the iron-shod hooves thudding dully against the packed dirt of the trail. Chin signaled retreat, and they crawled backward, upslope, until the depression hid them from view. Only then did they rise, brushing off the night's cling of grass seeds and grit. The pass narrowed ahead, a throat of stone flanked by sheer walls pocked with wind-hollowed caves, echoes of ancient waters long vanished. Tse and Chin paralleled the trail from above, leaping from boulder to boulder, their moccasins finding purchase on lichen-crusted rock where boots would slip. The sun crested fully now, its rays slicing through the defile like spears, igniting the red sandstone in fiery hues. Heat built swiftly, baking the air until it shimmered, and sweat traced salty paths down Tse's back, soaking his breechcloth. He paused to sip from his water skin, the last warm dregs tasting of leather and dust, then stoppered it tightly. Water was blood in this corridor of thirst. "See how he hugs the north wall?" Chin said, voice pitched low as they perched on a ledge overlooking the path. Below, the rider urged his mount closer to the shaded rock face, avoiding the open sun that beat down mercilessly. "Fears ambush from the south heights. Smart, but it leaves his flank to us." Tse peered down, noting the horse's head tossing, ears flicking at phantom sounds. The man gripped his reins loosely, one hand resting on the rifle slung across the pommel, his posture alert yet sagging with fatigue. Tse imagined the weight on him, saddlebags bulging with papers, perhaps sketches of Apache camps or routes scouted for the next patrol. One such map had doomed a band near the Gila last season, drawing soldiers like wolves to a kill. The trail twisted, descending into a steeper grade where loose gravel cascaded under the horses' steps, a rattle that echoed off the walls. Chie's ears pricked. Sound travelled far here, a betrayer of position. Chin led them along a faint game path, worn by generations of mule deer seeking the sparse forage of agave and beargrass clinging to crevices. Thorns snagged at Chie's blanket, drawing thin lines of blood on his arms, but he ignored the sting, focused on the rhythm below. The rider dismounted once, leading the horse by the bridle over a rock slide, his boots crunching audibly as he scanned the cliffs. Did he sense pursuit, or was it habit born of this unforgiving land? By mid-morning, the pass spat them into a broader valley, the San Simon's distant shimmer a mirage on the horizon, taunting with false promise. The ground leveled to cracked pliers, salt-encrusted flats where mirages danced, and the air filled with the buzz of flies drawn to the heat. Tsehe's throat burned, each swallow a rasp, but Chin pressed on without pause, dropping to the valley floor via a hidden chute of tumbled boulders. They reformed the shadow, trailing at a distance, using the scattered mesquites for cover. The horse's prints now stood out starkly in the soft soil, deep and fresh, the rider pushing to a trot to cover ground before the midday blaze peaked. Hunger clawed deeper, twisting Chea's gut, but he spotted opportunity, a cluster of prickly pear, pads swollen from the storm's gift. Chin nodded approval, and they paused briefly, using knives to slice the spines away and suck the moist pulp, the tart juice a fleeting balm. "Eat light," Chin warned, wiping his blade on his thigh. "Full belly slows the scout." Tsea complied, saving half a pad in his pouch for later, the fibrous chew sustaining him as they resumed. The valley exposed them more, wind-whipping dust into stinging veils that forced squinted eyes and covered mouths. Chea tasted the grit on his teeth, a constant companion, and felt the sun's assault on his skin, already darkening to leather. Below, the rider slowed, glancing back, a flicker of paranoia that made him veer toward a dry wash for concealment. Chin's lips thinned. "He's onto something. We close the gap." They descended, hearts quickening, the chase compressing like a noose. Tse'e's mind raced with possibilities. Confront the man for his dispatches, or merely observe and slip away with knowledge to fortify the band? Nail's face flashed in his thoughts, her steady hands weaving baskets by firelight, teaching sisters the patterns of survival. This pursuit was for them, to buy time against the encroaching bluecoats who felled forests for forts and diverted streams for cattle. As noon approached, the heat a palpable weight pressing down, they crested a low dune overlooking the wash. The rider had stopped, horse lathered and blowing, the man dismounting to check his map. A rolled parchment extracted from oiled cloth, spread on a flat rock. Chea froze, straining to see the ink lines from afar, but distance blurred them. Chian's hand signaled wait, his eyes calculating risks. The open exposure, the rifle's range, the valley's echo that would carry any cry for miles. A sudden gust howled through, kicking up a sand devil that obscured the scene momentarily, particles lashing Chehe's face like needles. When it cleared, the rider was remounting, but he'd left something behind. A small tin cup glinting in the sun, knocked over in haste. Chin's eyes lit with grim satisfaction. His mark. We take it. Learn more. They waited for him to round a bend, then darted down, Chea scooping the cup, dented army issue, etched with initials J.R., and the faint residue of coffee grounds, stale and cold. Pocketing it, they followed anew, the trail now a blaze of urgency. The rider pushed harder, the horse's gait faltering on the uneven terrain, kicking up clods of earth that baked instantly in the sun. Chea felt the pull of exhaustion in his own limbs, but adrenaline sharpened his senses, the snap of a dry twig under hoof, the shadow of a hawk wheeling overhead mirroring their flight. Intertribal whispers had reached their ears, Comanches raiding south, Mexicans pressing north, all squeezing the Apache lands tighter. This rider's path could tip the balance, drawing allies or enemies to their door. By early afternoon, the valley funneled toward a fork, north to the river's scant water, east to the fort's safety. The rider hesitated at the junction, horse pawing the ground, uncertainty in his slouch. Chin and Seye hunkered in a thicket of greasewood, thorns pricking through their blankets, the acrid smoke scent of the bushes masking their sweat. North, Chin predicted softly. Water calls louder than walls when parched. The choice made, the rider turned, vanishing into the haze. Seye exhaled, the tension coiling tighter. The land tested them all, scorching, relentless, deceptive in its vastness. But in reading its signs, Seye glimpsed his future, not just survivor but guardian of the band's hidden ways. As they trailed onward, the sun hammered down, forging resolve in the fire of pursuit. The relentless sun clawed at the valley floor, turning the air into a furnace that sucked moisture from every pore. Seye's tongue cleaved to the roof of his mouth, the prickly pear's juice a distant memory now, its sweetness soured by the grit coating his teeth. He and Chin moved parallel to the dry wash, using the irregular line of greasewood and saltbush for cover, their shadows shrinking as midday peaked. The rider's horse plodded northward, head low, flanks dark with sweat that gleamed like oil in the glare. Each hoofbeat stirred puffs of dust that hung suspended, marking the path like smoke signals for those who knew to read them. Chin's pace never faltered, though his breaths came shorter, measured to conserve energy. "The wash hides him from afar," he said, voice rough as sandpaper, "but it funnels sound. Listen for the echo off the banks." Seye strained his ears amid the wind's low moan and the ceaseless hum of cicadas, catching the faint clip-clop amplified by the earthen walls, a rhythm slowing, the horses' fatigue mirroring their own. The valley stretched onward, a vast basin of cracked clay pans and scattered creosote, where heat mirages twisted the horizon into watery illusions. Seye blinked against the sting in his eyes, wiping sweat that mixed with salt crust from the flats, leaving tracks on his cheeks like war paint. They closed the gap gradually, dropping into a side gully that paralleled the main wash, its bottom choked with flood-tossed debris, twisted roots and sun-bleached bones of small game. Seye's moccasins sank into the soft sediment, pulling at his legs with each step, but the cover allowed bolder glances. The rider rode slouched, rifle across his lap now, scanning the scrub with the wariness of a cornered javeliner. Seye wondered at the man's endurance. Whites often crumbled under the desert's assault, their heavy boots and woolens traps in the heat. Yet this one pressed on, driven by whatever sealed orders weighed his bags. A sudden whinny shattered the quiet, the horse shying at a rattlesnake coiled in the shade of a boulder. Its warning buzz lost in the wind. The rider reined hard, cursing aloud, the words carrying clear. "Damn viper, get on!" He dismounted, stones rattling as he prodded the snake aside with his boot, then remounted with a splash of water from his canteen to cool the beast's muzzle. Chin froze them in place, hand raised. He stops more now, thirst bites deep. Seye nodded, feeling it himself, the water skin empty, his lips cracked and bleeding. They hunkered behind a low ridge, the thorny branches of catclaw digging into their backs, drawing beads of blood that trickled warm down Seye's spine. From their vantage, Seye spotted fresh signs spilling from the wash. A trampled cluster of brittle grass, stems crushed flat and not yet curled by the sun, and a dark stain on the clay, urine from the horse, steaming faintly in the heat. "He's rationing," Seye murmured, piecing it with Chin's lessons. "No stream yet, so he wets the bit to ease the mouth." Chin's eyes gleamed with approval, though his face remained taut. "And see the drag." Saddlebag strap loosened, trailing low. Weight shifts, papers heavy or tools. The afternoon dragged, the sun a white-hot brand overhead, baking the ground until cracks widened like wounds. Seye's vision blurred at the edges, thirst sharpening his focus to survival's edge. They foraged as they went, Chin snapping off a yucca leaf and slicing it open for the moist core, its bitter pulp chewed to paste that eased the dryness. Seye followed suit, the fibrous mass sticking in his throat but staving off collapse. The land offered what it could, sparse, hard-won, but the Apache knew its rhythms, turning scarcity into strategy where others faltered. As the wash deepened, its banks rising to 10 feet of stratified red earth, the rider's pace faltered entirely. He led the horse now, boots slogging through the loose bottom, where hidden sinkholes lurked from old floods. Tse and Chin paralleled from the rim, peering down like hawks. A misstep. The horse's foreleg buckled into a soft spot, mud sucking at the hoof with a wet smack. The rider yanked the reins, hauling it free, but in the struggle, a saddlebag flap tore open, spilling contents. A rolled map fluttering to the ground, pinned briefly by a rock before the wind snatched it toward their side. Chin's whisper was urgent. "Down, quiet." They slid into the wash via a undercut bank, hearts pounding as they scooped the prize, parchment stiff with use, inked lines depicting rivers, mesas, and circled points that screamed of Apache trails. Tse's fingers trembled as he glimpsed names. Warm Springs, Geronimo's band, arrows marking patrol sweeps. This was no stray scout. He carried orders to converge forces, squeezing the mountains from east and south. Chin stuffed it into his pouch, face hardening like flint. "Enough to warn the elders, but we shadow still, see where he camps if he signals." Remounted, the rider pushed on, unaware of the theft, his curses fading into mutters. The wash widened near a cluster of cottonwoods, their leaves a rare green from subsurface water, roots delving deep where surface streams lied dry. Here, the San Simon's influence teased, a faint seep bubbling from the bank, enough for the horse to nose at greedily. The man knelt beside it, filling his canteen with deliberate dips, the water murky but life-giving. Che's mouth watered involuntarily, but Chin pulled him back. "We take from the trickle upstream. Patience drinks deeper." They circled wide, finding a higher seep where clear drops beaded on mossy rock. Che cupped his hands, the cool flow a mercy that revived him, washing away the dust's choke. Refreshed, they watched the rider make camp in the cottonwood shade. No fire, just a bedroll spread under the branches, rifle at hand. He ate from tins, the clink of metal sharp in the still air, then tethered the horse to a low branch, hobbling its forelegs with rawhide to prevent bolting. Dusk fell swiftly, the sky bruising purple as the heat ebbed into a deceptive calm. Tse and Chin settled on a nearby knoll, blending into the scrub, the night's chill already nipping. The rider paced his small sight, unfolding the remaining maps by fading light, tracing lines with a stubbed pencil. Tse strained to see, catching fragments, dates, troop numbers. A sketched ambush point near the pass they'd just crossed. Chin's breath was steady beside him. "He marks our lands as his, but we mark him now." Hunger returned with the dark, a gnawing void, but they shared a final strip of dried venison from Chin's pouch, chewy and salted, portioned with care. The valley quieted, save for the horse's occasional stamp and the distant hoot of an owl patrolling the thermals. Tse thought of the band, Nile leading them through the canyons, her stories binding the young to resilience. This knowledge, the map's secrets, could reroute their migration, evade the noose tightening around their world. Yet pursuit carried risks. One wrong step, and the rider's rifle could end it all. As stars wheeled overhead, the man bedded down, his form still under the blanket. Chin shifted closer to Tse, voice a thread in the night. "Tomorrow, he reaches the river ford. We decide then take him silent or let him go and race back." Tse met his uncle's gaze, the weight of choice settling like dew on his shoulders. The desert's pulse thrummed beneath them, indifferent to man or horse, offering lessons in every grain of sand. In the deepening cold, Tse felt the scout's fire kindle within, ready to carry the flame homeward, no matter the dawn's trials. The night's chill wrapped the valley like a shroud, stars pricking the black vault overhead with indifferent light. Tse huddled against Chin on the knoll, the greasewood's thorny embrace offering scant warmth, its resinous scent mingling with the damp earth from the seep below. His body ached from the day's grind, legs knotted from leaping ridges, shoulders raw from thorns, but sleep evaded him, chased by the map's weight in Chin's pouch. Inked lines of rivers and trails burned in his mind, a blueprint of invasion that could scatter the Warm Springs band like chaff in a gale. Nail's face haunted him, her calloused hands portioning meager rations, whispering encouragements to his sisters as they forded arroyos back in the canyons. Chin shifted, his breath a soft rasp in the quiet. "Dawn comes swift, we move before he stirs." Tse nodded, rubbing circulation into numb fingers, the cold a familiar foe that tested resolve as surely as the sun's blaze. Below, the rider's form lay still under his bedroll, the horse's silhouette a darker bulk against the cottonwoods, its hobbles creaking faintly with each shift. No fire warmed the camp. The man knew the risks, his vigilance a thin veil over exhaustion. Tse envied the horse's blanket of hide, thick against the frost rimming the leaves, while his own thin weave barely held back the night's bite. They waited in silence, the valley's sounds a sparse chorus, the trickle of the seep, a coyote's distant yip fading into the wind, the rustle of small rodents in the underbrush. Tse's stomach twisted, empty save for the venison's echo, but he pushed it down, focusing on the land's subtle shifts, the way dew beaded on spider silk strung between branches, glistening like tiny signals in the moonlight. Chin had taught him to read these too. Moisture's path revealing hidden seeps or the direction of prevailing winds that carried scents miles. As the eastern sky paled to slate, the rider rose with a groan, stretching limbs stiff from the hard ground. He moved methodically, splashing water on his face from the canteen, the droplets catching the first light like fleeting jewels. Tse watched him check the saddlebags, fingers probing the torn flap with a frown, but the missing map went unnoticed in the dimness, perhaps chalked up to the storm's chaos. The horse whickered as the man approached, untying the hobbles and offering a handful of grain from a nosebag, the kernels rattling softly. No words, just the quiet bond of man and beast forged in miles of dust and heat. Chin tugged Tse's sleeve. He heads for the ford. We cut across the flats, beat him to the river. They slipped down the knoll, moccasins silent on the cooling sand, circling wide to avoid the cottonwood's rustle. The air warmed incrementally, carrying the seep's mineral tang and the faint yeasty smell of the horse's sweat from the night. Tse's feet throbbed, blisters forming from the relentless trek, but he matched Chin's stride, weaving through saltbush where white crystals crunched underfoot, gritty as ground glass. The valley sloped northward, the ground firming to packed clay pocked with gopher holes that could twist an ankle in the dark. They gained the flats, a broad expanse where the San Simon's dry bed snaked like a scar, its banks eroded into steep cuts from flash floods past. Mirages already teased the horizon, wavering pools that promised relief but delivered only more heat. Tse's throat rasped with thirst, the seep's water a memory, but Chien veered them toward a cluster of willows marking a side channel, roots delving to hidden moisture. They knelt, digging shallow with knives into the mud, coaxing brackish drops that they filtered through cloth twisted from their blankets. Small sips, Chin cautioned, his voice gravelly from disuse. Rivers close, but the fords watched sometimes, patrols from the east. Che complied, the liquid cool but earthy, easing the fire in his chest. He thought of the band's last crossing, weeks back, when Nail had timed it at dusk to mask splashes. Herders urging ponies through waist-deep current, while elders scanned for bluecoat signs. One wrong ford, and currents could sweep away the weak. Survival hinged on knowing the river's moods, its sandbars shifting like deceitful allies. By full light, they reached the river's edge, the San Simon a sluggish ribbon of brown water winding through reeds, its banks lined with tamarisk imported by settlers, choking native growth. The ford lay a mile upstream, a shallow gravel bar where hooves wouldn't mire, but Chin scanned the far shore first, open plains rolling to the Dragoon foothills, dotted with mesquite that could hide a dozen riders. Clear now, he murmured. We cross hidden, wait for him on the rise. They waded in, the current tugging at their thighs cold from mountain snowmelt, despite the sun's climb. Tse gripped a root for balance, water numbing his legs, silt clouding around his steps. Fish darted in the shallows, silver flashes amid the murk, and he resisted the urge to spear one. Time pressed harder than hunger. Emerging on the far bank, they shook off the wet, the chill evaporating swiftly in the rising heat, leaving skin prickled and clothes heavy. Climbing the rise, a low embankment of tumbled shale, they settled into cover, eyes on the valley mouth where the rider would emerge. Minutes stretched to an hour, the sun hammering down, turning the air thick and oppressive. Che's blanket steamed as it dried, the weave tightening against his skin. Sweat beaded and evaporated in equal measure, salt crusting his lips. Chin passed the map pouch, unfolding it briefly for Chee to study, arrows converging on the Chiricahwas, troop estimates scrawled in hasty script, 50 cavalry from Bowie, 20 scouts from the north. Chee's gut tightened. Their band numbered barely 30 fighting men, women and children, the true vulnerability. "We take it to the elders," he whispered. "Reroute south, link with Geronimo's kin." Chien refolded it, eyes never leaving the trail. If the rider lives, he reports the tear. They hunt harder. The words hung heavy, a choice between mercy's risk and blood's certainty. Apache ways favored cunning over slaughter when odds tilted, but the land's squeeze left little room for half measures. A dust plume signaled approach, the rider pushing the horse to a lope across the flats. The beast's head tossing in protest, he reined in at the river, dismounting to test the current with a stick, his posture tense, rifle slung ready. Cheye noted the slump in his shoulders, the way he glanced skyward for vultures, signs of a man fraying at the edges. The desert's toll etching deeper lines on his face. The horse plunged in first, water splashing to its withers, the man following on foot, leading the bridle. Midway, the current surged, horse stumbling on a hidden drop, nearly unseating him. He cursed, voice cracking over the rush, hauling the reins with raw strength. Chin's hand tightened on Cheye's arm. Now or never. But as the rider neared the far bank, a new sound pierced the air. A low whinny from the east echoed by another. Cheye's blood chilled. Shadows moved in the mesquite. 3 figures on horseback, blue uniforms glinting. Patrol, scouts linking with the rider, their Spencer carbines catching the sun. The man waved, relief flooding his shout. "Halt! Over here! Got the dispatches!" Chin pulled Seke low. "Ambush turns. We slip west, double back." The patrol splashed across, voices murmuring plans, oblivious to the eyes on the rise. Seke's heart raced, the map's secrets now a fuse lit by proximity. They retreated silently, thorns raking as they gained distance, the river's murmur fading behind. Exhaustion clawed, but purpose burned hotter. The trail's end birthed a greater pursuit, racing knowledge home before the noose drew tight. The sun climbed merciless, forging their path through the unforgiving plain. Resilience the only ally in the gathering storm. The sun's zenith scorched the plain, turning the air into a shimmering haze that blurred the line between earth and sky. Chehe and Chin retreated westward through the mesquite thicket, their moccasins sinking into the sun-baked clay, with each hurried step, leaving no trace beyond the faint displacement of thorns that would right themselves by dusk. The river's murmur faded behind them, swallowed by the wind's relentless howl, but the patrol's voices lingered in Cheye's ears, clipped words of rendezvous and sweeps, a noose of iron and gunpowder tightening around the mountains. His chest heaved, not just from the sprint but from the fire of what they'd gleaned. The map's arrows pointing like spears at every hidden camp, every migration route etched in the elders' memories. Chin led without pause, his wiry frame cutting through the scrub like a blade through hide, eyes flicking to the horizon where the dragoon foothills rose in jagged silhouette. "We loop south, skirt the patrol's flank," he said, voice low and edged with the gravel of thirst. "No straight line, they fan wide." Cheye nodded, wiping sweat that stung his cracked lips, the salt mixing with the metallic tang of fear. The map burned in Chin's pouch against his chest, her fragile shield of knowledge heavier than any waterskin. They moved in tandem, years of shared hunts syncing their rhythm, Chin scanning ahead for dust plumes, Cheye listening for the distant crack of saddle leather or the jingle of spurs. The plain offered no mercy, its surface a mosaic of salt flats and scattered cholla, spines glinting like warnings in the glare. Heat radiated from the ground, waves distorting the air until Cheye's vision swam, mirages teasing with false oases that dissolved into more dust. His throat was raw, each swallow a scrape of sand, but he rationed the last drops from the seep, knowing the band's camp lay hours away, nestled in a canyon mouth where pinon shade and a trickling spring promised respite. Thoughts of Nail steadied him, her steady gaze as she ground mescal into flour, portioning it for the young ones, her stories of past evasions weaving resilience into the children's bones. This pursuit, born of a faint hoofmark days cold, had become their safeguard, turning the land's whispers into a bulwark against the bluecoats' thunder. By mid-afternoon, the heat peaked, a crushing weight that slowed even Qian's stride, forcing them to a crouch run among the greasewood clusters. Tse'e's legs burned, blisters splitting under his moccasins, but he pushed on, spotting signs of their own band's passage. A snapped twig from a pony's tether, bent eastward but veering south to avoid the open valley. They moved at dawn, Tse'e murmured, relief threading his words. Qin grunted, pointing to a faint scuff in the dust, moccasin prints, light and spaced for caution, leading toward a dry arroyo. Nail's lead. She reads the patrols like we read trails. They followed the arroyo's bank, its walls providing scant shadow, the air thick with the scent of baked earth and creosote bursting underfoot. A sudden gust whipped sand into their faces, forcing squinted eyes and covered mouths, but Qin pressed them into a shallow cut, where undercut roots offered cover. From there, they glimpsed the patrol's dust trail far east, a hazy column snaking toward the river ford, 5 riders now, the messenger's horse lathered and trailing. Tse'e's pulse steadied. Distance was their ally, the vastness of the plain a canvas for evasion. He thought of the rider's discarded cup, the map's theft. Small thefts that unraveled grand plans, proving the Apache's edge in a land that rewarded the unseen. As the sun dipped westward, painting the mesquites in long shadows, the arroyo deepened into a labyrinth of twists, its bottom choked with flood debris. Tangled tamarisk and sun-bleached bones half buried in silt. Tse'e's feet dragged now, exhaustion coiling like wire in his muscles, but Qin shared a sliver of pemmican, the fatty chew a spark against the void in his belly. "Eat slow," Qin said, breaking it with calloused fingers. The body remembers strength from the land, not haste. Tse'e chewed, the berry's tartness cutting through the grease, and felt a surge, not just nourishment, but the bond of uncle to nephew, scout to apprentice. Qin's scars, faint lines across his forearms from thorn scrapes and close calls, mirrored Tse'e's own budding marks, a map of trials etched in flesh. The trail converged with the bands at dusk, the canyon mouth unfolding like a hidden embrace, sheer walls of basalt veined with quartz, pinon pines clinging to ledges, their needles rustling in the cooling breeze. Smoke curled from a screened fire pit, thin and acrid, masked by wet sage to evade distant noses. Nail spotted them first, rising from her crouch by the flames, her face a mask of dust and resolve, eyes searching for wounds. "You return whole," she said simply, handing Tse'e a gourd of spring water, its cool depth a balm that he sipped greedily, then passed to Qin. The band gathered in the alcove's shelter, 20 souls from elders with bowed backs to children clutching slings, ponies tethered in the shadows. Qin unfolded the map under the fire's flicker, the parchment crackling as he traced the lines for the elders. "Patrols from Bowie and the north, he explained, voice steady as the canyon stone. "They mark our waters, our passes." This rider carried the call. "Converge here by the full moon." Murmurs rippled, faces hardening, but Nail's hand on Tse'e's shoulder grounded him. "And you followed when the trail went cold?" she asked, pride softening her tone. Tse'e met her gaze, the day's weight lifting in the telling. "The land spoke, mother. Bent thorns in the wash, salt from the horse's sweat on the wind. Even rain couldn't bury it. The mud held the cracks, the banks the echoes." He described the pursuit, the storm's deluge erasing prints only to reveal them in hardened veins, the rider's haste snagging yucca and spilling secrets, the patrol's arrival turning chase to flight. The elders nodded, one grey-haired man with a notched ear adding, "Trails never die here, they sleep, waiting for eyes like yours." As stars blanketed the sky, the cold descending like a blanket of frost, the band planned, reroute south at dawn, link with Chiricahua kin beyond the dragoons, using hidden seeps and game paths unknown to maps. Chea sat by the fire, roasting agave hearts that sizzled with juices, the warmth seeping into his bones. His sisters pressed close, one braiding his hair with yucca strands, whispering questions about the rider's fear scent on the breeze. Laughter mingled with the crackle, a rare thread of unity amid the peril. Qin settled beside him, eyes reflecting the flames. You tracked days cold, nephew. Not by luck, but by listening. The horse's weight in turned pebbles, the man's haste in snapped stalks. Whites see lines on paper. We see the land's breath. Che felt the truth settle, a mantle heavier than scars but lighter than loss. His father's shadow, once a void, now fueled purpose, guardian of trails unseen, weaver of survival from dust and silence. The fire died to embers, the canyon wrapping them in quiet vigil. Tomorrow's migration loomed, scorching miles, scarce water, the constant dance with danger. But in this moment, under the indifferent stars, Tsea knew their strength, not in bows or blades, but in the unyielding harmony with a land that revealed its secrets to those who endured. The rider's trail, once a ghost, had forged him anew, proving why Apache scouts turned cold echoes into living warnings, ensuring the NDE's flame flickered on in the heart of the desert.